Good afternoon. My name is Juliana Smith. I'm a student at Delaware Technical Community College. Today I'm going over an interview I conducted with a Miss Anthea Briscoe from Trinidad. This is a picture of me and Anthea in her kitchen. She's one of my really good friends' moms. Um, so Trinidad is a southern Caribbean island. It sits just north of the northern coast of South America. Um, and she grew up in the northern part of the country. And when I asked her about like her family, she got really detailed. So her paternal great grandfather was African and inherited a Spanish cocoa plantation in Tamina through marriage. So her grandfather married into a Spanish family who had this plantation of cocoa trees, and their last name was Cocopayo. Later on, the family ended up splitting the farm in between family as cocoa prices dropped in the mid-century. Um, and part of her family still lives on it. Her maternal great-grandmother descended from African slaves sent to Barbados. She moved to Trinidad in early childhood, and that's how her mother's side of the family sort of met in Trinidad. The rest of her family, she said, were from parts of Venezuela. And I thought that was really, really interesting. So she grew up, Anthea, is from Trinidad, but so much of her family were from other African and South American countries, which I thought was really interesting. Anthea migrated to the United States when she was 14 years old. Um, Her family migrated to the United States after her brother went to MIT. And then she had some of her older siblings who also immigrated to America to go to college. And her father worked for the agricultural business and was rapidly replaced by machines in the 70s. And so they migrated to the United States. Currently, her and her father, Anthea, and her father and all of her other siblings live in the United States. Her one brother lives in England, and her mother still lives in Trinidad, and she goes to visit about every 5 or 6 years. So we talked about like family and how people in Trinidad view their family, and they're an extremely family-oriented culture, just like most of the other Caribbean islands, where live-in extended family is very common. Children are raised with not only their parents and brothers and sisters, but their cousins, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents. Um, Child raising is much more strict than in America. American childbearing is much more lax and interactive, whereas in Trinidad it is a much more strict um kind of upbringing, and they have very high expectations for their children. They are expected to excel in school and are pushed to excel, much like Asian culture. Interestingly, Anthea is a Jehovah's Witness, and I asked her about that. Like, did that come from Trinidad? And no. So she grew up exposed to an array of religions, including Catholicism and different practices. She didn't start practicing as a Jehovah's Witness until after she moved here, in later adulthood, and it was her grandmother that exposed her to that. But it was a very personal choice for her. That didn't come from living in Trinidad. So, as everyone knows, Caribbean food is delicious. I, unfortunately, am allergic to garlic. So much of the international food that is so good, I can't really have. Anthea offered to make me this meal, like curried chickpeas, and I would have loved to take her up on her offer, but I couldn't. American food, even though a lot of people cook with garlic, most of the time it's because they're cooking cuisines that aren't necessarily like American founded foods. We're a very meat and potato society. Um, in Trinidad, they love stew, lots of seafood. Obviously, it's a tropical island. Chicken. She says they eat a lot of chicken and rice. And of course, tropical fruits. I really found it interesting that their rice kind of looked like stir fry, but she said spicy. because of the curry and stuff, and then traditional seafood. So I kind of lumped these or these things together because this was we spent a lot of time talking. All of the pictures here are things from Trinidad that Anthea has on display in her home. This is a mortar and pestle to grind spices that she actually uses. It smells like, I actually couldn't like really smell it that much because she grinds garlic in it a lot. But that was really cool. I mentioned the Trinidad rum. I had a friend who went to Trinidad when we were in like middle school, and her dad brought back rum, and she showed me this bottle of traditional Trinidadian rum, where the top of the hat is like a shot glass, so you pour the rum into that, and that's what you drink out of. And over here were paintings that came from her great grandmother, actually. These are very old paintings that she kept up with over the years and just had them all reframed and kind of refinished. And Trinidad is a very male-oriented society. When I asked her how their society views gender, that's how she answered it. It's very male-oriented. And that makes sense. For hundreds of years, it was an agricultural community in the cocoa business, and what we know about communities when agriculture developed, that's when we started specifying roles to gender. Women were in the house with the children and did that side of life, and men were most of the times pioneers of agriculture. And she showed me in these pictures, like in this one, she used to wear her hair like that. She said, I saw pictures of myself as a young girl, and I wondered where I got that hairstyle from. And she was like, and I look at this painting, and I'm like, oh, I had that hairstyle. So this wasn't something that was like hot during the time that Anthea was growing up. This is a traditional female hairstyle for Trinidad. A classic old clay oven. This is a giant mortar, so much like this one. This was a giant mortar and pestle that they would use to make like stew. She said much of their stew is from just like churning and churning and churning and churning food until you get a stew-like object. And then of course we see here women tending to chores. Something that was really interesting and funny that was brought up in our time together is I asked her how does Trinidad and people in Trinidad like deal with time? Like time relevance are they tardy a lot? Is it important to be punctual? In the United States, most of the time the attitude is if you're on time, you're late. Punctuality is pretty important in most, especially like the business end of American culture. And she's the one that brought up CPT, colored people time. Which I thought was hysterical considering the situation. And colored people time is just people, how they describe how black people tendency to move slower, not be as in a rush to go anywhere. They're not necessarily very punctual, and that's exactly what she said. Punctuality is not a priority in any Caribbean culture, and if you think about other Caribbean islands, that's very true. And she said that people don't like to be rushed. In America, we are a very high-strung, tense society, and we're constantly rushing ourselves, rushing other people, are very on edge to be on time or early, and not so much in their culture. So as strict as they are with their parenting and in the family, like that household strictiveness, that doesn't necessarily relate to their social culture, which I found really interesting. I think that the overall point of any assignment of this nature is to recognize that, yes, I interviewed a woman from Trinidad, even though she migrated to the United States very young. She still carries herself as a woman of Trinidad, and I found that to be very important. But her roots weren't just Trinidad, just like no person anywhere, most of the time in the modern age, their roots don't come from one place. Her roots came from much of Africa. She had Spanish. The language that they spoke was called Patois, which was a bastardization of Spanish and African. So her roots, just like anyone else's, are equally as diverse as the fact that she's from Trinidad, which makes her diverse. And that's what's important to remember when you're talking about diverse cultures and people from different places, is that much like us, they're from everywhere. We're all from everywhere. And it was really interesting to sit down with her and talk to her about all of this. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that you enjoyed this experience as much as I did. I found Trinidad to be really interesting. Thank you so much.